heading to work, on your way to the gym, or maybe taking a quick study break. Perfect timing. Because in the next few minutes, we're going to look at one of the most practical, really vital decision-making tools in management accounting, dealing with limiting factors. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, well, it's absolutely crucial for anyone studying or practicing performance management. We aren't here to just, define scarcity in a textbook way. We're diving deep into the logic, the thinking behind these quite sophisticated optimization tools. We'll move from the basics, key factor analysis, right through to the strategic stuff you get from linear programming. Our goal, genuine clarity for you, that kind of aha moment, so you really understand the why behind these resource allocation decisions. Hopefully that means less reliance on just memorizing heavy calculations for the exam or, when you're actually making calls in a business.
Absolutely. That logical foundation is, well, it's non-negotiable, isn't it? In the business world, optimization is really the name of the game. Pretty much every decision a manager faces, it boils down to resource allocation. They're constantly juggling finite capacity, limited money, people, time, machine power. And their job, fundamentally, is to squeeze the maximum return out of those constraints. Those things they can't just wish away. Limiting factors. They're the ultimate real-world headache that, frankly, separates smart, profitable strategy from just inefficient chaos. If you can really master how to prioritize resources when things are tight and, crucially, put a number on the value of fixing a bottleneck, well, then you're mastering the core of advanced business strategy.
Okay, let's unpack that core issue then. We start with the definition. Limiting factors, LFs. Sometimes people just call them scarce resources or constraints. Put simply, a limiting factor is, well, it's anything acting as a bottleneck, right? A choke point, something holding the company back.
Yeah.
It restricts your ability to hit maximum output or maximize sales, even if the market wants more. It's the single biggest thing stopping you from making more profit, essentially.
Exactly. And it's rarely just one single thing, which is why we spend so much time analyzing them. When we talk about scarcity, we need to be specific about what these constraints might actually look like in, a real manufacturing firm or even a service business.
Okay, let's run through the main types then. The big four operational constraints managers wrestle with daily. First up, you got materials, the classic one. Yeah, this could be a specific raw material that's just rare, maybe hard to find geologically, or difficult to source perhaps, like need special import licenses, long lead times, that sort of thing. A really common example is when a key supplier puts you on allocation for a component, or maybe a specific chemical. You might want, say, 1,000 kilos, but they can only guarantee 50 this month. Doesn't matter how much cash you have or how many workers. If you can't get the basic inputs, production just stops.
Yeah, that material scarcity dictates everything that follows. Then you got the human element, labor. Even if demand for your product is through the roof, you're often constrained by the standard working week, right? The total number of labor hours available. And it's not just about the total time either. Often the scarcity isn't the sheer number of people, but the skill level. You might have plenty of general workers, but a critical shortage of, say, specialized technicians or expert welders or maybe senior software developers. In that case, the scarcity of skilled labor hours is the real limiting factor, and that forces you to decide which high-value products get access to those few expert people.
Makes sense. The third category takes us onto the factory floor. Machine time. This is often the big one, the critical non-human resource, especially where things are automated. Imagine you've got 5 production steps. 4 of them are super fast, but one machine, maybe a specialized press or a big furnace or a complex milling machine, can only handle, say, 100 units an hour while the others handle 200. Well, that slow machine, that's your bottleneck resource. Our source materials, like in Chapter 5, really hammer this point home. All the other processes have to slow down to match that slowest link. If you try speeding up the machines before it, you just create massive queues and piles of wasted inventory, which is why optimizing the time on that bottleneck machine is absolutely paramount.
Absolutely. And finally, there's a factor that sometimes feels a bit, well, counterintuitive as a constraint: demand. We usually focus on the physical limits, materials, labor, machines, but you can't ignore the market itself. A company obviously wants to maximize its contribution, but let's say market research in your current order show the maximum weekly demand for product X is only 1,000 units. Well, you can't rationally plan to make 5,000, can you? Even if your factory has spare capacity and plenty of workers available, that fixed market demand acts as a very real limiting factor on your production plan. It stops you building up stock you simply can't sell.
Right, so we landed this fundamental problem for managers. Demand for our profitable stuff exceeds our ability to supply it. Because of scarcity in one or maybe more of these areas, this brings us to a manager's primary role. When you are resource constrained like this, what's the core decision they absolutely have to make?
The primary decision is actually quite simple in concept, but incredibly difficult in practice. It's how best to allocate those scarce resources. You have to make sure every single kilogram of that rare material, every available hour of that skilled technician's time, or every minute on that critical machine is used in a way that maximizes your financial goal. And in the short term, that financial goal is almost always maximizing total contribution or profit. You're essentially asking, out of all the products we could make, which one gives us the biggest return for every precious unit of the constraint we actually consume, which gives the best bang for the buck, basically.
Okay, and that question leads us straight into the first tool we need to talk about, the most straightforward one, key factor analysis, or KFA.
Exactly. KFA is specifically designed for those situations where management is pretty sure, or knows for certain, that only one resource is truly the bottleneck. For example, maybe labor hours are really tight, but you've got plenty of materials, machines are sitting idle. It's just the people hours. This single constraint really simplifies the whole decision because you've only got one thing you need to optimize against.
Right, and this is where that critical ranking rule comes in. If you've got one constraint, you need a logical way to prioritize production. And that method is ranking products based on the contribution earned per unit of the limited resource.
Let's just unpack that calculation a bit because the logic is so important here.
Yeah, we absolutely must be crystal clear on why contribution is the metric we focus on. This is like a super important insight for any short-term decision-making, which is what KFA is all about.
Yeah.
Your fixed costs, things like the factory rent for the year or the salaries of the admin staff, they're irrelevant to this specific product mix decision in the short term.
Why is that? Why ignore fixed costs here? Because those costs are going to be incurred anyway. Whether you decide to make 100 units of product A or 100 units of product B or 50 of each within your current setup, you still have to pay the rent, you still have to pay the salaries. They're sunk for this decision. So the only costs that really matter when deciding which product to push right now are the variable costs, the ones that change directly with how many units you make. Materials, maybe some direct labor, variable overheads.
Got it. So we focus on maximizing contribution, which is sales revenue, minus all those variable costs, because
Yep.
that's the margin left over. That's what helps cover the fixed costs and hopefully deliver a profit at the end of the day. So we prioritize the product that gives the most contribution for every hour or kilo or whatever the scarce resource is. We guarantee the best possible overall result for the business, given that limit.
Exactly. Let's use a quick example. Peter's chairs again, standard S and executive E. Let's say materials are scarce this time. S needs 2 kilograms, E needs 4 kilograms. Okay, and let's say S gives $6 contribution per chair and E gives $10 contribution. Now, just glancing at that, you might think, E is better, $10 is more than $6, but that ignores the scarcity the materials. We have to calculate the return per kilogram of that scarce material. For S, it's $6 divided by 2 kilograms. That's $3 contribution per kilogram. For E, it's $10 divided by 4 kilograms. That's $2.50 contribution per kilogram. So look at that. Despite having a lower contribution per chair, the standard chair S is actually the priority here.
Because it uses the scarce material more efficiently. It gives the company more bang for its buck for every kilo it uses up.
Precisely. So the manager then builds the production plan based on this ranking. You satisfy all the demand for the highest ranked product first, in this case S. You keep making S until either you've met all the demand for S or you've completely run out of the scarce material. Only then, if you still have material left, you move on to the second ranked product, E, and so on down the list. This ensures the total contribution across everything you make is as high as it possibly can be.
Okay, that KFA logic seems pretty straightforward when it's just one constraint.
It is. And speaking of optimizing resource use, this same fundamental idea, this logic, it's been refined in more modern management thinking, particularly with throughput accounting, TA. This comes up a lot in Chapter 5 materials.
Right, TA. We should probably touch on that connection. It builds on KFA with a slightly different perspective, doesn't it?
It does. The core goal of TA is identical to KFA. Optimize the use of whatever resource is most constrain the bottleneck. But the key difference, the sort of conceptual twist in TA, is how it views cost variability, particularly in the very short term. TA often comes from environments like just-in-time or highly automated factories, and it makes a pretty bold assumption.
Which is?
It assumes that in the short run, pretty much all costs inside the factory, including direct labor and what we traditionally call variable overheads, are essentially fixed. They're just total factory costs.
Whoa, hang on. That needs a pause. You're saying throughput accounting treats direct labor as fixed. That definitely clashes with traditional KFA, where labor is usually seen as variable. Why would TA do that?
It's a reflection of how many modern factories actually operate. In highly automated settings or places with strong JIT systems, labor often isn't hired and fired based on weekly production volume. Staff might be salaried or on contracts with guaranteed minimum hours. If the bottleneck machine slows down for an afternoon, the workforce is still there, maybe doing maintenance or training, but their cost for that period is fixed from a short-term decision perspective. So, TA takes this view and says the only truly variable cost, the only cost that disappears instantly if you stop producing one unit, is the material cost.
Ah, I see the logic now. It's tied to the structure of modern production. So if only materials are variable, that must change the return calculation quite significantly compared to KFA's contribution.
Exactly. Instead of contribution, sales minus all variable costs, TA uses throughput. And throughput is defined really simply: sales revenue minus material cost. That's it. So the priority metric, the ranking factor, becomes throughput per unit of the key resource, typically throughput per minute or per hour on the bottleneck machine. This forces management to focus even more intensely on just maximizing that material margin generated specifically by the bottleneck, kind of ignoring short-term fluctuations in labor efficiency or overhead absorption.
And this focus really doubles down on identifying that bottleneck resource, doesn't it? That term comes from the theory of constraints, TOC, like in the Yamco example from Chapter 5, where a product goes through pressing, stretching, rolling. The final output rate is always capped by the slowest step, the slowest machine. That machine is the bottleneck. And crucially, all these calculations, whether you're using KFA's contribution or TA's throughput, they must be based on the time spent on that specific bottleneck machine, right? Not some other machine that happens to have loads of spare capacity.
Absolutely spot on. Using time on a non-bottleneck resource for your ranking is a classic error. It tells you nothing useful for optimizing the whole system. So, to quickly recap this section, whether you use the broader KFA definition of contribution or the stricter TA definition of throughput, the core logic is constant. 1. Identify the primary constraint. 2. Calculate the return, contribution or throughput, generated per unit of that constraint. 3. Rank your products accordingly and build your plan. It's a powerful method, as long as there really is only one main limiting factor. If that changes, the whole approach needs to change too.
Right. And that's where the real world often throws a spanner in the works, isn't it? Because often you don't just have one problem. What happens when you're facing scarcity on multiple fronts at the same time? Let's say product A gives you the best contribution per labor hour, fantastic. But product B gives you the highest contribution per kilogram of material. Now what? Your simple ranking system just falls apart.
It completely breaks down. That's the classic management headache, and it's exactly why KFA, while useful, isn't enough for complex operations. You can't just blindly maximize return on labor if doing so means you completely burn through all your scarce material and can't make product B at all. Because maybe product B, even though it was lower ranked on labor, would have given a better overall contribution if you'd found the right balance. We need a systematic way to find that sweet spot, that optimal mix of products that respects all the limitations at the same time.
And that necessity brings us neatly to the technique called linear programming, or LP. Chapter 6 in the study materials confirms if you have two or more scarce resources and they're both genuinely restricting you, you have to use LP to find the single best production mix. Now, for this deep dive, we're really going to focus on the logic, the thinking behind LP, not getting bogged down in the complex algebra or drawing the graphs perfectly. Understanding the setup is way more important than doing the sums by hand these days.
Totally agree. The real value for a manager today isn't manually solving LP problems. Computers do that instantly. It's about understanding what information you need to feed into the model and, crucially, how to interpret the strategic insights that come out of it. Fundamentally, LP is a systematic process. You can think of it in about 5 steps. It's designed to model those real-world constraints mathematically, so an algorithm can find the solution that gives the highest return.
Okay, step 1 sounds simple enough.
Yeah.
Defining the unknowns, just assigning variables, right?
Yeah.
Like in our Peter chair example, we'd maybe use S for the number of standard chairs and E for the number of executive chairs we decide to make.
Yep, that's it. Step 2 is where the real thinking happens. Formulating constraints. This is the crucial bit where you translate those real-world limits, materials, labor hours, machine time, even demand ceilings into mathematical inequalities. This is how you map the actual operational reality. Let's make it vivid with Peter's chairs again. Suppose the total available material is 80 kilograms. We know a standard chair uses 2 kilograms and an executive E uses 4 kilograms. The constraint gets written as an inequality. $2 plus 4E, 80/20, that less than or equal to sign is key.
Okay, $2 plus 4E. Let's think about what that actually means for the production manager on the floor. That inequality dictates the trade-offs, right? If the manager decides, okay, let's make 30 standard chairs, they've instantly used up $2 times 30 equals to 60 kilograms of material, which means out of the 80 kilogram total, they've only got $80, $60, labels 20 kilograms left for the executive chairs. And since each executive chair needs 4 kilograms, well, they're limited. They can only make a maximum of $20, 4 kilos is 5 executive chairs. That constraint forces the choice.
Exactly. And you have to do this for all the constraints. If there's a labor limit, say 100 hours available, and S takes 1 hour and E takes 2 hours, you'd write $1 plus 2, $1,100. If there's a maximum demand for standard chairs of, say, 40, you write liter $4. You capture every boundary. And don't forget the really obvious ones, the non-negativity constraints. You can't make a negative number of chairs. So liter dollar is lellers. These often get forgotten, but they're logically essential. All these inequalities together, they define the playground, the operational boundaries of the company.
Got it. So that's constraints sorted. Step 3 is defining the objective function. This is basically setting the goal, right? What are we trying to achieve? If we know the contribution per chair, let's stick with $6 for standard S and $9 for executive E, then our objective function is the thing we want to maximize. Maximize $dollars plus 6S plus 9E. That's the mathematical way of saying get the highest possible total contribution from selling S and E chairs.
Precisely. That's the setup. Steps 4 and 5 are the mechanics, actually solving it, often by graphing the constraints and finding the optimum point. Now, we're not going deep into the graphing, but the logic behind the graph is fascinating and gives real insight. When you plot all those constraint lines, those inequalities we wrote, on a graph, they carve out a shape, an enclosed area. This area has a name, the feasible area or feasible region. Any point, any combination of S and E chairs inside that area or on its boundary lines represents a production plan that's actually possible. It respects all the resource limits, any point outside that area. Physically impossible with the current resources. You just can't make that many chairs.
Okay, so the feasible area shows us all the possible plans. But we don't want just any possible plan. We want the best one, the one that maximizes C, our total contribution. Where do we find that?
And this is the absolute key logical insight of linear programming. The optimal solution, the point within that feasible area that gives the highest possible value for C, 6 Celsius plus 91, will always, without fail, lie at an intersection point, a corner of that feasible area shape.
Always at a corner. It can't be somewhere smooth in the middle of the area. Why? Why are the corners special?
Think about what a corner represents. A corner point on that graph is where 2, or sometimes more, of your constraint lines intersect. It's a point where you are simultaneously hitting the absolute limit of at least 2 different resources. If you were at a point inside the feasible area, not on an edge or corner, that would mean you have some slack, some unused capacity in all your resources. And if you have unused capacity in everything, well, you could probably make a few more chairs, right? You could move towards one of the boundary lines, increasing production and contribution until at least one resource is fully used up. Then you could potentially move along that boundary line until a second resource is also fully used up, hitting a corner. That corner point represents the most extreme utilization of your scarce resources possible within the rules.
Ah, okay. So the corners represent points where you've pushed production right up against the limits of multiple resources simultaneously. You can't make any more without breaking one of those limits.
Sure.
Exactly. In our Peter Care example, maybe the optimal corner point is where the material constraint line, $2 less plus 4E equals $80, crosses the labor constraint line, $1 plus 2E equals $100. Solving those 2 equations simultaneously gives you a specific combination. Maybe it turns out to be S $30 and equals $6. That specific mix is the only mix that completely uses up both materials and labor. And LP guarantees that this corner point yields the highest possible total contribution, which would be $6 times 30 plus 9 times 5 plus 45 plus 45 was 225 to 5. It finds that mathematically perfect balance point. And understanding that this optimal solution lies at a corner where resources are fully utilized is the perfect lead-in to the really strategic part of the analysis, understanding what the leftover data tells us.
Okay, so we've used LP, found the optimal production plan. Maybe it's 30 standard chairs, 5 executive chairs. Job done.
Not quite. Finding the plan is only half the battle. The real strategic gold, and honestly the reason this stuff is so heavily tested in exams, comes after you find that optimal solution. We need to analyze the data about that solution, and this is where 2 incredibly powerful concepts come into play: slack and shadow price. These tell the manager where they should focus their attention, where to spend money, and frankly, what not to worry about.
All right, let's take it one by one. Start with slack. You mentioned it earlier, spare capacity, basically.
Yep, that's the
Yeah.
light English version. Slack is simply the amount of a particular resource that remains unused when you're producing at that optimal mix. Remember, our optimal solution was, say, E at $2, EU 5 to Y. We said that point was maybe where the material and labor constraint lines met. If that's the case, it means we used exactly 80 kilograms of material. $2 times 30 plus 4 times 5 plus 60 plus 20 plus $80, and exactly 100 hours of labor. $1 times 30 plus 2 times 5 plus 30 plus 10 equals $40. Let's adjust the labor constraint to several plus E, several $4 for this example. So 30 plus 5 plus 5, $35.30, leaving 5 hours slack. Let's assume the original numbers, $1 plus 2E plus $2 meant $130, meant $130 plus 2 equal 5, and meant $100 plus $2 plus $40 are unused. Apologies, let's restart that bit for clarity.
Okay, let's refine that. Maybe the constraints were different. Let's say the optimum did fully use material, 80 kilograms, and fully used labor, 100 hours. So material and labor constraints are binding. They have zero slack.
Right. They are binding constraints because they are preventing us from producing even more. But what about other constraints? Let's say there was also a maximum demand constraint for executive chairs. Perhaps market research said we could sell at most 10 executive chairs per week.
Okay, but our optimal plan only produces evotation executive chairs.
Exactly. So we could have sold 10, but we only made 5. That means we have $10 5 units of unused demand capacity for executive chairs. That is 5 units of slack on the executive chair demand constraint.
So what does that slack actually tell the manager? What's the strategic implication?
It's incredibly simple, but powerful. If a resource or constraint has slack, it is non-binding. It is not the thing that's stopping you from making more money right now. In this case, the demand limit for executive chairs isn't the problem. The problem is we ran out of materials or labor, or both, before we could make more executive chairs.
So if that executive chair demand has slack, what should management do about it?
Essentially, ignore it for now. That resource, that demand potential, is not the priority. Management should not be spending time or money trying to boost demand for executive chairs, maybe running marketing campaigns, if they physically can't produce enough to meet the current demand limit due to material or labor shortages. The slack analysis instantly focuses management attention away from the non-binding constraints and squarely onto the binding ones, the materials and labor in this scenario. Those are the bottlenecks that need fixing.
Okay, that makes sense. Slack tells you what isn't the problem. Now, let's talk about the concept that tells you the value of fixing the actual problems. The shadow price, also called the dual price sometimes.
That's right. The shadow price is arguably the most actionable piece of information LP gives you because it quantifies the value of making a small change, a marginal change. The definition is very specific, and you need to get it right. It's the maximum extra amount the company would rationally be willing to pay to acquire one additional unit of a limited or binding resource.
Right, keyword there is extra amount. It's not just the cost. It's the premium, the bonus you'd pay above the current cost to get just one more unit of that scarce thing. How does that translate into value for the manager?
It directly represents the increase in total contribution or profit, depending on the objective function, that would result from having one more unit of that scarce resource. Let's go back to labor being a binding constraint. Maybe the normal working week is fully utilized. You can get more labor hours, but you have to pay overtime, which costs more, right? There's a premium. Now, if the LP analysis calculates the shadow price for labor as, say, 0 to 75 cents per hour.
Okay, shadow price equals 75 cents. What does that number tell me?
It tells the manager this. For every additional hour of labor you can get your hands on through overtime, perhaps, the company's total contribution will increase by 0 to 75 cents. This means the manager knows they can justify paying up to 75 cents per hour more than the current standard labor cost to secure that overtime. As long as the premium paid for that extra hour is less than or equal to 75 cents, the company will be better off overall.
Let's make that concrete with the chair example again. Let's say materials were binding, and the LP tells us the shadow price for materials is 1.125 per kilogram. Now, my purchasing manager is currently buying this material for $10 per kilograms. Does this shadow price mean they should immediately be willing to pay up to $10 plus 1.125 pfennig equals 11.125 cents per kilograms? Yeah. Is this just like common sense quantified?
It is common sense quantified, but it's also validated and precise in a way that pure intuition can't be. That $1.125 sinker gives the manager a hard ceiling. Imagine a new supplier pops up offering the same material, but they want $10.50 per kilograms. Without the shadow price, the manager might hesitate, it's more expensive. But with the shadow price, they know, with mathematical certainty derived from the LP model, that buying at $10.50 is profitable. Why? Because the marginal benefit of getting that extra kilogram, an extra 1.125 cents in contribution, is greater than the marginal extra cost, 50 cents premium over the usual $10. It turns negotiation from guesswork into a strategically justified decision.
Okay, but here's where it gets maybe a bit more subtle. The range of validity. You said that one extra unit yields 1.125 more contribution. But does that 1.125 value hold true if I manage to buy like 1 million extra kilograms of material? Surely not.
Absolutely not. And this is a really critical point for ACCA students to grasp. That shadow price, the 1.125 asks per kilogram, is only valid over a certain range of increase for that resource. We call it the range of validity. Remember, our optimal solution was at a corner point where maybe the material constraint and the labor constraint lines intersected. That point defined the best mix. If you relax the material constraint just a little bit, say increase availability from 80 kilograms to 81 kilograms, the optimal corner point will shift just slightly along the labor constraint line. The same two constraints are still binding, and that shadow price of 1.125 holds true for that first extra kilo.
Okay, so for small increases, the value holds.
Yes. But imagine you relax the material constraint significantly. Maybe you secure a massive new supply, increasing availability from 80 kilograms way up to, say, 300 kilograms. As you keep increasing the material availability, that optimal corner point keeps shifting. Eventually, it will shift so far that it hits a different constraint line. Perhaps it hits the maximum demand limit for standard chairs, or maybe it hits the limit of a machine's capacity that wasn't binding before. As soon as a new constraint becomes binding because you've relaxed the original material constraint so much, the whole optimal solution changes fundamentally. The original material constraint might not even be binding anymore. And if it's no longer binding, its shadow price collapses potentially to zero.
Ah, right. So the purchasing manager can only use that 1.125 premium as justification to buy extra material up to a certain point. They can keep buying at a premium until they've bought so much extra material that suddenly, say, labor hours become the sole primary bottleneck, or maybe demand becomes the bottleneck. That range limits how much they should be willing to pay the premium for.
Well, precisely. The full LP output usually provides this range, it might say. The shadow price for material is 1.125 per kilograms, and this is valid for an increase of up to, say, 20 kilograms. That tells the manager. You can profitably acquire up to an extra 20 kilograms of material, paying a premium of up to 1.125 per kilograms for it. But if you need more than 20 kilograms extra, the situation changes, and this 1.125 value no longer applies. Your money might then be better spent trying to relieve the next bottleneck that emerges. It provides a roadmap for staged investment.
Okay, this is building a really clear picture. Now let's connect slack and shadow price. You mentioned the most crucial logical insight here, the one people often miss, the zero value rule. Can you state it again?
If a resource has slack, meaning it's not fully utilized at the optimal solution, then its shadow price must be zero.
Why? What's the logic?
It's pure economic sense. If you haven't even used up all the resource you already have, you've got slack, why on earth would you rationally be willing to pay a premium shadow price to get one more unit of it?
You wouldn't. It makes no sense. We said earlier the executive chair demand might have had 5 units of slack because the optimal plan was to make 5, but the maximum demand was 10.
Therefore, the shadow price for that executive chair demand constraint, $, must be zero. There is zero financial benefit in paying extra to increase that demand ceiling, maybe through advertising, when you aren't even hitting the current ceiling because of other binding constraints like materials or labor. The manager should invest zero time and zero money in relaxing a non-binding constraint. The whole analysis, finding the optimum, identifying which constraints are binding, positive shadow price, and which have slack, zero shadow price, gives management this incredibly powerful quantified guide for where to focus their efforts and investments.
Okay, let's pull this all together now. We've gone through the theory, the chairs, the materials. How does this actually translate? How does understanding limiting factors move from being exam theory to being genuinely useful tools for managers making real decisions in complex businesses? You mentioned it informs several key areas.
Absolutely. It fundamentally impacts at least three major areas of day-to-day and strategic management, providing solid justification for potentially major decisions. First, and maybe the most direct application, is production planning. Simply running the KFA or LP model ensures that the weekly or monthly production schedule is actually geared towards maximizing the overall financial goal. It stops managers from, accidentally filling the factory with products that feel busy but actually deliver a poor return per unit of the real constraint. It ensures every machine hour, every labor hour is prioritized for the highest contribution possible given the unavoidable limits.
So it prevents suboptimal choices based on gut feel or just filling capacity for the sake of it.
Exactly. Second, and this links directly back to shadow price and its range of validity, is resource negotiation and budgeting. Those shadow prices. They provide concrete, data-backed justification for potentially huge financial decisions. Think about negotiating prices with key suppliers for scarce materials. The shadow price tells you your walk-away point, how much premium is justifiable. Or consider big strategic choices like make or buy decisions, which often come up in Chapter 9 discussions. Should we make this component internally using our scarce resources or buy it from an outside supplier?
Right, make or buy under scarcity. That's a common exam scenario.
Yeah.
How does limiting factor analysis guide that decision? It's not just about which option is cheaper overall, is it?
No, not when resources are limited. Chapter 9 guidance is clear. The decision should be based on maximizing the saving per unit of the scarce resource that you achieve by making the item internally instead of buying it in.
Okay, walk us through a quick example of that calculation. Needs careful thought.
Sure. Let's say we have two components, X and Y. We can make them ourselves or buy them from outside. And let's assume, again, that skilled labor hours are the single scarce resource holding us back. Okay, component X. It costs us $30 in variable cost to make it internally. We could buy it for $40 from a supplier. So making it saves us $10 per unit. Component Y, it costs us $50 in variable cost to make internally. We could buy it for $65. So making Y saves us $15 per unit.
Right, so just looking at the total saving, Y looks better, $15 saving versus $10 saving.
Correct. But now we bring in the constraint. Let's say making component X internally uses 2 hours of our scarce skilled labor, and making component Y internally uses 5 hours of that same scarce labor.
Okay, now we need to calculate the efficiency, the saving per hour of scarce labor.
Exactly. For component X, the saving is $10 and it uses 2 hours. So that's $10, 2 hours equals $5 saving per scarce labor hour. For component Y, the saving is $15 and it uses 5 hours. So that's $15, 5 hours equals $3 saving per scarce labor hour.
So even though Y offered a bigger total saving per unit, X is actually the priority for internal manufacturing.
Precisely. Because every hour of that precious skilled labor is better utilized generating a $5 saving by making X rather than just a $3 saving by making Y. If we have limited hours, we should use them to make X first and only make Y internally if we still have hours left after meeting the requirement for X. We'd buy Y from the external supplier if necessary to free up hours for X. It just shows how that core logic, always optimized based on the constraint, applies across all sorts of short-term decisions, not just the basic product mix.
That's a really clear illustration. Okay, what's the third major application area?
The third one is about focusing efficiency efforts and capital investment. The whole analysis identifying the binding constraints and their shadow prices shines a spotlight on the true financially significant bottleneck in the entire operation. If your LP analysis shows that labor has a shadow price of, say, 75 pesos per hour, but a critical machine has a shadow price of $5 per hour.
That tells you where the real leverage is.
Absolutely. It tells management that the financial return from relieving the machine bottleneck, getting 1 more hour of machine time, is over 6 times greater than the return from getting 1 more hour of labor. So if the CEO comes asking, where should we spend our capital budget this year to improve efficiency? The LP analysis provides the answer loud and clear. Invest in anything that increases the capacity or throughput of that critical machine. Buy a faster one, improve its maintenance, optimize its setup times.
Right, because there's absolutely no point spending money on, say, a bigger warehouse for raw materials if materials aren't the binding constraint and the machine is.
Exactly. You invest where the shadow price is highest because that's where relieving the constraint delivers the biggest financial bang for the buck. It guides decisions on automation, staff training, process re-engineering, even improving supplier reliability if materials are the bottleneck.
Okay, this really frames it as a powerful strategic tool. So bringing it back to the listener, someone preparing for their performance management exam, what's the absolute key takeaway? What do the examiners really want to see demonstrated?
More than anything, the exam tests your understanding of the underlying logic and how to apply it appropriately. It's not usually about complex manual calculations anymore. You absolutely need to know the clear difference. When is KFA, simple ranking, appropriate? Only when there's one clear limiting factor. When do you have to use LP principles? When there are two or more limiting factors acting simultaneously. And critically, you must be able to explain, using clear management language, what slack and shadow price actually mean strategically. Being able to say, this resource has slack, therefore management should not invest in expanding it. Or the shadow price of this resource is $6, meaning the company could justify paying up to $6 extra to acquire one more unit because that's the additional contribution it generates. That kind of analytical explanation, showing you grasp the opportunity cost implications and the investment signals, that's where the high marks are awarded. It proves you understand the strategic value, not just the formula. Hashtag outro.
Right, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today and hopefully brought some real clarity to a vital area. We've journeyed from just recognizing scarcity across materials, labor, machine time, even demand, through to the logic of ranking products by contribution per unit of constraint when things are simple, then navigating the complexity of multiple constraints using the conceptual framework of linear programming, and finally, unlocking the really powerful strategic insights hidden in the post-solution data, understanding slack and shadow price.
Yeah, and if we could leave you with just one final thought to sort of mull over, let it be this. Limiting factor analysis at its heart is all about identifying and actually quantifying opportunity cost. It's the essential toolkit that helps ensure a business is always steering towards the path of maximum possible returns given its current reality. By identifying the value of relaxing a constraint, that shadow price, you're literally putting a number on the opportunity lost by not having more of that resource. It ensures that management actions, whether it's negotiating with suppliers, planning production, or investing in new equipment, are always focused on relieving the most critical, the most financially significant bottleneck first. It's about keeping the business operating at its absolute peak potential efficiency.
And that really is the power of understanding limiting factors. It's all about making the very best use of what you've got. If this deep dive helps you think a bit smarter about these crucial decisions, don't forget to subscribe to the SmartPass YouTube channel. We've got plenty more ACCA Performance Management audio lessons there, designs you can listen anytime, anywhere. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.